John Miles is technically a really superb vocalist, and what can we say about Robert? He's brilliant.
Jimmy Page was not a legend born to the sound of applause. He was forged in silence, obsession, magic, and melodies that seemed to echo from the deepest recesses of the human soul. In the world of rock, where fire blazes from screams and destruction, he didn't shout, didn't smash. Instead, he whispered, summoned, and made entire arenas hold their breath with riffs as delicate as incense smoke. With his wild curly hair, enigmatic dark eyes, and his Les Paul like a wand in the hands of a sorcerer, Jimmy Page didn't play the guitar. He conjured other worlds with every note. From a lonely boy with nothing but an old guitar and a radio for company, he walked straight into studios with the Kinks and the Who, then gave birth to Led Zeppelin, not a band, but a ritual that defined an era. When Robert Plant howled, Bonham thundered like a storm, and Jones wove sonic textures, it was Page who opened the portal to another dimension. Stairway to Heaven, Kashmir, Dazed and Confused. They weren't songs. They were ceremonies, not for entertainment, but for summoning emotions that had never been named. But like all magicians, he carried a curse. A hidden illegal relationship with 14-year-old Lori Maddox, cloaked behind velvet curtains, heroin addiction that drained his spirit in Zeppelin's final years, and a metaphysical obsession that led him to dwell in the shadows, inside a mansion once owned by Aleister Crowley. When the band collapsed after Bonham's death, Jimmy Page vanished too, leaving behind a void that no one, not even himself, could ever truly fill. At 80, he still lives, still quietly strums through dust-covered chords in his private sanctum, still refuses memoirs, Zeppelin reunions, and the glare of the modern spotlight. Because perhaps Jimmy Page never belonged to this era. He is a living relic of a lost world, an aging sorcerer who still holds the key to the past. How could someone who gave us Stairway to Heaven also be accused of conjuring darkness? Be hailed as a guitar master and condemned as an exploiter of youth? Join Rock Discovery as we follow the deepest notes in Jimmy Page's symphony, where light and shadow merge, where music isn't written, but summoned from the void. And if you've ever felt a chill run down your spine at the sound of a single riff, maybe, just maybe, you've already stepped into his world. Early life. Jimmy Page was born on January 9, 1944, in the suburban town of Heston, West London, at a time when Britain was still reeling under the weight of World War II. His father was an industrial engineer, his mother a secretary, a typical middle-class family, neither impoverished nor affluent, and with no artistic tradition to speak of. Yet within the walls of their modest three-bedroom home lived a boy with distant eyes, quietly wandering the rooms as if listening to something no one else could hear. At the age of 8, the family moved to Epsom, Surrey, a countryside town so quiet that Jimmy would later say he had no one to play with. And it was in that isolation that he discovered the first gateway into his private world, an abandoned acoustic guitar left behind in a corner of the house. No one taught him. No one guided him. Jimmy learned by sitting in front of the TV for hours, watching musicians perform and mimicking their every move. He learned from radio, from vinyl records, and most of all, from instinct. From the beginning, Page didn't see music as a skill. It was a language. At school, he was a shy, unremarkable student, always carrying with him a sense of otherness. While classmates chased footballs and math grades, Jimmy was sketching strange symbols, jotting down obscure chord shapes, and diving into books on astrology, mysticism, and Eastern philosophy. He didn't fully understand them, but felt drawn in, as if some unseen force was whispering behind his ear. The adults around him called it eccentricity. Jimmy didn't care. He knew his world wasn't here. At just 13, he appeared on a BBC television program, guitar in hand and a timid smile on his face. When asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, the boy replied simply, I want to find something that's never existed before. Not to be a star, not to be rich, but to discover the unnamed. By 15, he made a life-altering move. Without warning, he dropped out of school to follow the call of the guitar. No one stopped him, but no one encouraged him either. A teenager with no diploma, no mentor, no safety net, stepping barefoot into the professional music world, guided only by a wild, unshaped instinct. And from that moment on, Jimmy Page was no longer a boy. He was beginning to become a guide into a form of music that had never existed before. Haunting, sacred, and spellbound, just like the silent boyhood he left behind. Early career. While most teenagers were still struggling with graduation exams, Jimmy Page, at just 16, was already inside some of the most prestigious recording studios in Britain, clutching his Gibson guitar and quietly laying down backing tracks for a generation of singers. No stage lights, no name on album sleeves, but everyone in the industry knew if you needed a professional, creative, punctual, and flawless guitarist, call Jimmy Page. By the early 1960s, he had quickly become the most sought-after session guitarist in London. Page played on hundreds of recordings, so many that he later admitted he couldn't even remember all the artists he worked with. The Who, The Kinks, Marianne Faithfull, Petula Clark, Donovan, Tom Jones. Many of the riffs heard daily on British radio came from a young man in the shadows, hitting every note with precision. But for someone burning with creativity, staying behind the curtain was never going to be enough. Page began to feel suffocated in the role of the perfect technician. He wanted to create his own music, not just provide a backdrop for others. Around this time, he started performing live more often, joining a few smaller bands, though none quite felt like home. Then, in 1966, came a turning point. He was invited to join the Yardbirds, a rising blues rock band that had already served as a launchpad for two other guitar legends, Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. Initially recruited to play bass, Page quickly transitioned to lead guitar, forming a dual-axe lineup with Beck that became the stuff of legend. Performances like Happenings 10 Years Time Ago and Stroll On weren't just rock, they were theatrical spells, where Page began experimenting with sonic effects, wind-like distortion, and even playing guitar with a violin bow. However, tensions within the Yardbirds began to mount. Jeff Beck left. The music lost direction. When the band dissolved in 1968, Page didn't see it as an ending, but the beginning of something far greater. He kept the name The New Yardbirds, recruited Robert Plant, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones, and began laying the foundation for an entirely new entity. They had only played together a few days, but when they jammed on Communication Breakdown, something beyond reason took hold. Page knew this was no longer a band. This was a summoning of a musical beast. And to give that beast a name worthy of its weight, he renamed the group Led Zeppelin, a name heavy as lead, light enough to float like a zeppelin, and one that would never come down. Career success. When Led Zeppelin emerged in late 1968, few believed that four relatively unknown men, a studio guitarist, an obscure vocalist from the Midlands, a thunderous drummer, and a quiet, reserved bassist, could pose any real threat to the established norms of popular music. But Jimmy Page knew. He wasn't forming a band. He was building a ritual machine where every note was a gateway into uncharted rock territory. Their debut album, Led Zeppelin, 1969, was an uncompromising manifesto: distorted blues, wild drumming, a voice like rolling thunder, and a guitar that roared like a demon awakened. Page, both the band's chief songwriter and producer, didn't play guitar the conventional way. He bent notes, reversed tape, played backward, bowed strings with a violin bow like he was extracting spirits from the listener's core. Every technical boundary was torn apart, not to show off, but to express what words couldn't reach. Within just 5 years, Led Zeppelin released a string of legendary albums. Led Zeppelin II, 1969, 3, 1970, 4, 1971, Houses of the Holy, 1973. The pinnacle was Led Zeppelin 4, where the world first heard Stairway to Heaven. It wasn't just an 8-minute ballad, it was a spiritual monument where Page layered sound upon sound, from whispered acoustics to explosive riffs, guiding listeners through a journey of meditation, eruption, silence, and transcendence. In the studio, Jimmy Page was the silent dictator. He controlled everything: the microphone placement, guitar positioning, echo ratios in the cottage at Headley Grange. He didn't believe in randomness. He believed music had a will of its own, and his job was to tame it, then release it at the precise moment. On stage, Page wasn't the crowd pleaser, that was Plant's domain. But he was the spiritual core, the fire starter with his riffs and haunted expression. Zeppelin's live shows weren't concerts. They were ancient rituals conducted through electricity and thunder. From 1975 to 1977, Led Zeppelin became the biggest band on Earth. No need for singles, no need for press, just release an album and go on tour. Their performances at Madison Square Garden, Earl's Court, or the Pontiac Silverdome were global cultural events. And at the center of it all, Jimmy Page, in his dragon-embroidered black suit, playing dazed and confused with a violin bow like summoning ghosts from sound, became an image forever etched into rock mythology. But the greater the success, the closer the darkness crept. By 1976, Page had grown alarmingly thin, gaunt, and began to stagger on stage. Rumors of heroin, occult rituals, and internal band conflict began to swirl. Led Zeppelin, like the music they created, was never built to burn at that intensity forever. And Jimmy Page knew it. But he kept going, not for fame, but because he couldn't stop summoning music, even if it meant setting himself on fire to do it. Scandals and shadows. When Jimmy Page stepped on stage in his dragon-embroidered suit, wielding his jet-black Les Paul, he wasn't just a musician, he was a summoner. But the deeper he ventured into the metaphysical realm of music, the closer the darkness crept in. The first and most controversial scandal was his relationship with Laurie Maddox, an underage model just 14 years old when she met Page. The affair was kept under strict wraps by the Zeppelin entourage, with Laurie closely monitored and hidden from the public eye. Decades later, when she recounted the story publicly, it shocked audiences. Though there were no legal repercussions at the time, in today's light, it stands as one of the darkest stains on Page's legacy. He has never apologized or offered an explanation, and that silence only deepens the weight of it. Around the same time, Page became deeply engrossed in the occult, particularly the teachings of Aleister Crowley. He purchased Boleskine House, where Crowley once conducted magical rituals, and began incorporating esoteric symbols into album art, vinyl runouts, and stage aesthetics. From the fourth album onward, he stopped signing his name, replacing it with the cryptic symbol Zoso. As the band's fame grew, Page retreated further from reality, and it was precisely then that tragedy began to unfold. Robert Plant narrowly survived a car crash in 1975. 2 years later, his son died suddenly. And in 1980, John Bonham passed away from alcohol poisoning. Led Zeppelin disbanded. Many fans believed Page's occult fascinations had called forth something best left untouched. He never denied it, never confirmed it. He simply remained silent, like any true sorcerer when the ritual spins out of control. But it wasn't just the world around him that collapsed. Page himself began to decay. From 1976 onward, he descended into heroin addiction, physically and mentally drained. During the final tours, he stumbled across stages, missed notes, and was nearly absent during the recording of In Through the Outdoor. The band still released music, but the essence of Page was gone. He was no longer the guiding hand of Stairway to Heaven, but a weary shell of his former self. Internal relationships also frayed. John Paul Jones, the quiet creative partner, had considered leaving as early as 1977, feeling increasingly sidelined. After the breakup of Zeppelin, Page and Plant reunited multiple times, yet Jones was left out. When he found out about one project through the press, he merely said, "I guess they forgot my number." Even at the 2007 reunion concert, the look exchanged between them betrayed a distance time hadn't healed. Jimmy Page remains an irreplaceable icon, but behind the title lies a long trail of unresolved shadows, a scandalous relationship, occult obsessions, addiction, fractured brotherhood. He never defended himself, never explained, and perhaps he didn't need to, because it's that very darkness, with all its truths, rumors, and silences, that shaped a Jimmy Page no one fully understands, and no one will ever forget. Personal life. In stark contrast to the spotlight and swirling tales of mysticism, Jimmy Page's personal life has always been wrapped in a thick veil of silence. He was never the flamboyant celebrity type, nor one to fuel his fame with personal revelations. Throughout his career, Page lived quietly, privately, as if a door always existed between him and the world, and he never truly opened it. Page has had multiple relationships, most of which remained discreet. His first known partner was French model Charlotte Martin, with whom he had a daughter, Scarlett Page, who would go on to become a renowned rock photographer. They parted ways quietly. What followed was a series of ambiguous romances with models, artists, and young actresses. Some were whispered about due to questionable age gaps, but no confirmations, no denials. Page treated his private life as forbidden ground, a place the public had no right to enter, not even with a question. He has 4 children with 4 different women, but has never been portrayed as a father in the media. No family portraits, no heartfelt interviews, no proud moments shared online. Page chose to parent on his own terms, silently, without explanation, leaving behind little more than a few grainy paparazzi shots. Those close to him, when asked, describe him with the usual Pageisms: quiet, mysterious, unreadable. Even his choice of residence reflects that detachment. Page lives in the Tower House, a Gothic castle tucked in the heart of London, once owned by a Victorian poet and architect. Inside, the home resembles a private museum, ancient books, rare instruments, occult paintings, and artifacts linked to Aleister Crowley. He rarely leaves, except for the occasional appearance at awards shows or events tied to classical music. A friend once remarked, "Jimmy lives like an old wizard in his own tower." The world outside may be loud, but to Page, silence is a language of its own. He's never written a memoir, never given a long interview, never engaged in public disputes, even when directly attacked. Perhaps he understands that once the mouth opens, the magic vanishes. But silence, especially the silence of a man who once summoned some of the most powerful sounds in rock history, still demands attention. Jimmy Page, in all things personal, has never let anyone truly touch the core of who he is. And perhaps he doesn't have to, because his life, from the guitar, the arcane cymbals, to the doors forever shut, is already a labyrinth with no exit, a place where even those closest to him remain standing at the threshold. Legacy and influence. Jimmy Page isn't just one of the greatest guitarists of all time. He is the man who redrew the emotional map of modern music, not with speed, technique, or flamboyant showmanship, but with raw instinct and a strange intimacy with the unspeakable. His music doesn't aim for the ears, it dives straight into the subconscious, evoking feelings as intangible as scent, as haunting as nightmares, as sacred as the dim light flickering in an ancient temple. His legacy with Led Zeppelin is undeniable. Over 300 million albums sold, 6 consecutive legendary records, and an influence that transcends genre: rock, blues, folk, metal, even film scores and visual arts. Riffs like Whole Lotta Love, Black Dog, Kashmir, and Immigrant Song are not just replayed. They are revered like scripture in every guitar textbook. Stairway to Heaven, with its layered progression architected by Page, is still considered by many generations to be the greatest rock composition of all time. But Page was more than a musician. He was a pioneer in sound production. From a young age, he introduced distant miking, natural ambient recording, and intricate guitar layering to studio work, forever changing how bands were captured on record. In an era when most artists only played and sang, Page took full creative control, from song structure to how every note would resonate in the listener's ear. His Zeppelin recordings remain essential study for modern producers. Since the 1980s, nearly every major guitarist, Slash, Guns N' Roses, Jack White, The White Stripes, Eddie Van Halen, Tom Morello, Rage Against the Machine, and countless indie and experimental players have cited Jimmy Page as a spiritual forefather. He didn't just introduce a new way to play. He introduced a new way to think about the guitar, about sound, about the artist's role in building entire sonic worlds. To Page, the guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was a gateway into deeper consciousness, a ritual tool for transforming emotion into roar, echo, and whisper, sometimes sounding like it came from beyond the physical realm. In 1995, Page was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Yardbirds, once with Led Zeppelin. But for him, medals never mattered. The greatest honors came from the future, from kids who started learning guitar by struggling through Heartbreaker or Dazed and Confused in their cramped bedrooms and grew up to build their own sonic universes. Scarlett Page, his daughter, once said in a rare interview, "My father's not a man of many words, but when he plays, I know he's telling a story that words were never enough for." And perhaps it's that silence, the way Jimmy Page left his mark quietly, yet deeply, in the hearts of millions. That is the most enduring legacy he gave the world. He never tried to become a symbol, but somehow the symbol formed around him, like a halo forged out of shadow. Present life. At 80, Jimmy Page remains unmistakably himself, quiet, enigmatic, and entirely out of sync with the modern age. No social media, no memoirs, no talk shows. He lives reclusively in Tower House, a Gothic mansion nestled in the heart of London, which he has transformed into a personal shrine to music, esoterica, and memory. For Page, the past isn't something to reminisce about, it's the material of daily life. He doesn't follow the current of time because he never needed to swim in it to begin with. 2024 brought an unusual shift. For the first time since 2004, Led Zeppelin's entire media presence went silent. No announcements, no updates, not a single word from the band. And yet, Page wasn't entirely absent. In September 2024, he was honored at the Academy of Achievement, a prestigious event hosted by the British Embassy in the US, recognizing his musical and humanitarian contributions. It was a different Jimmy Page, calm, standing behind a microphone, receiving a medal in a minimalist suit. No guitar, no riff, just history standing beside him. As 2025 unfolded, the old sorcerer of rock began to open a few long-shut doors. He invited journalist Jon Snow to visit Tower House, allowing the public a rare glimpse into his private realm. Guitars hanging on stone walls, dusty ancient books, reel-to-reel tapes, and magical symbols resting beside a tea tray. No one knows why he agreed. Perhaps it was time. Or perhaps he felt the need to leave behind something before time could erase it all. In early February 2025, the long-awaited documentary Becoming Led Zeppelin finally hit theaters. The first time all three surviving band members agreed to recount the creation of their myth. Page was heavily involved, overseeing the content and reaffirming his role as the band's creative architect. Though he doesn't appear much in the trailer, Every frame and cut bears his aesthetic fingerprint, classical, subdued, and surreal, just like the music he once summoned. Yet, the past doesn't let go easily. In May 2025, Jimmy Page was sued by Jake Holmes, who accused him of breaching a copyright settlement over Dazed and Confused by releasing unauthorized recordings. The case resurfaced one of the longest-standing controversies in Page's career, and once again, he was forced to confront his own legacy, this time in a courtroom. Though he no longer performs, Page remains present. In July 2025, he unveiled the Nymph amplifier in collaboration with Sundragon, a 1-watt tube amp that recreates Zeppelin's iconic tones on a miniature scale. A toy for sonic obsessives, but also a final statement. Even a single note played in a bedroom should sound like the universe trembling. He's no longer center stage, but he hasn't vanished into shadow either. He appears precisely when needed, like a strange wind from the past brushing against the 21st century, reminding us that rock and roll was once a spell, once a religion, and once there was a man who needed no words, only a riff to silence the world. And maybe that's how Jimmy Page lives now, like an old sorcerer keeping the flame alive for the final ritual. No noise, no farewell, just still playing, but this time, just for himself. Jimmy Page was never meant to be easily understood. He didn't live to be adored, nor did he make art to explain himself. In the world of rock and roll, where most legends burn out too fast or fade too slow, he is the survivor who never fully stepped into the light. A Varaslo, an architect, a man who stood silently behind every storm, and the only one patient enough to let the music find him, not the other way around. His legacy doesn't just lie in the millions of albums sold, the thunderous tours, or the title of greatest guitarist of the 20th century. It lives in the way he was heard even in silence, in the way he played guitar like summoning spirits, in the way he never abandoned that strange light he crafted from shadow. He never tried to keep the legend of Led Zeppelin alive, because he understood that some things are only meant to live once in history. And that was enough. In an increasingly noisy world, Jimmy Page chose to become a sustained note, not to draw attention, but to remind us that once, music wasn't made to entertain, but to be felt and believed. If you've ever shivered during Kashmir, gone still in the night with no quarter, or felt that Stairway to Heaven was something far beyond a song, then perhaps you already know, Jimmy Page didn't just write music, he left behind a gateway. Leave us a comment. Which of his songs has haunted you the most? And if you still feel the echo of a riff from 1971 reverberating inside you, then congratulations. You're still living in Jimmy Page's world. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next legendary story.